has struck a last-minute deal to buy 5 million doses of a new coronavirus vaccine, which could be available here next spring.
Well, early trials of the Moderna vaccine showed it to be nearly 95% effective and easier to store than the Pfizer version. We're joined now by Professor Devi Sridhar, Professor of Oncology Angus Dalgleish, and Neil Browning, who was the second person in the world to receive the Moderna vaccine during trials. Well, Neil Browning, thank you for joining us. Speak to you first, if we may. What was it like?
Honestly, it was like getting a regular flu shot. There was nothing big about it.
So tell us the process. Is it the same as the Pfizer vaccine in that you have one dose, then you have to wait a few weeks before you get the second dose? And how does it feel when you have the vaccine? What are the effects?
So because I was in the early trial, they went ahead and gave us the dose and had us stay in the clinic for an hour or so to make sure there was no really adverse reactions, as this had not been previously given to animals, let alone humans. The second injection was 4 weeks later. Both times I experienced no issues other than waking up with a sore arm, very slightly sore the next morning, just like a regular flu shot.
That's interesting. You point out that this had not been trialled on animals previously to being trialled on humans. Now, whatever you might think about animal testing, that did mean that you were right at the forefront and the front line of the experimentation.
Well, he was an animal being tested.
For this. So
yeah.
what did you do? Were you nervous in any way? There's a lot of concern amongst some people that this has been done very quickly, and people need to be persuaded in some cases that this is going to be okay.
Sure, there's always going to be people who are opposed to vaccination. My mother was a registered nurse. My wife is a registered nurse. So I've grown up in and around medicine all of my life. I did the research. They provided reams of documents explaining how this works, what it does, and the risks seemed minimal compared to what the benefits the world could see. There's no chance of actually catching COVID-19 from this because there's no part of the actual virus in this vaccine.
And how long did they tell you your immunity to COVID will last?
They didn't. That's part of being in this trial, is both the safety of humans and the efficacy of it. And the efficacy is going to be measured in terms of how well it combats and how long it lasts in the bloodstream. So being one of the first people vaccinated, I still go in periodically over the next year since I've been given the initial dose in order for them to draw blood, look at the immune response, and see how long those valuable antibodies are going to last.
How does it feel, Neil, that you may be part of history, that you might be one of the people
saving
who,
the
through
world.
your own self-sacrifice and risk, that you may have saved the world, literally?
Honestly, it's myself. It was in our group 44 other people volunteering. It's the medical staff. It's the pharmacy companies. Everyone's in on this. I definitely put my body out there, and it was something that, you know, gave me pause. And I certainly didn't think it would garner the level of attention that this has over the past 8 months now. But, you know, it feels good to put myself out there and do what people need to in order to make this a better world.
Well, you know what? Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they roll up their sleeve and they get injected with stuff. And you're one of the heroes. And I really do think the people on these trials around the world,
yes,
the self-sacrifice that you've done, which is still a lot unknown about this virus, has been extraordinary. And it's amazing that within a few months we are where we are. So, Neil Browning, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your public service. Yeah. How much did you get paid for this?
Thanks. There was no compensation around this. This is just something you volunteer for and you choose to do or not.
Amazing. You saved the world for nothing. You're my kind of hero. Neil Browning, thank you very much indeed.
Let's talk to Professor Devi Sridhar, and then we can talk to Professor Angus Dalgleish as well. Professor Devi Sridhar, out of the tens of thousands of people like Neil who did the trials, there are a number of people who did get COVID and who had received the vaccine. So we know it's not 100% effective, but way more people who didn't receive the vaccine got COVID. So that's how they get to the 94, 95% effectiveness. What we don't know is what factors yet led to the people getting COVID who'd had the vaccine, or how long immunity for the rest will last?
Yeah, no, there's still big questions. I mean, around how long immunity lasts, around safety. Also that, none of these vaccines have been trialed in children. So we're not looking at giving them to children under the age of 12. But I think for people, I mean, my message would be there's a lot to smile about. There's a lot to be really hopeful about. We have, already Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, 3 trials that look all very promising. We have mass testing coming online. So I think, the next few months are hard, but the message is if we can get through the next few months and prevent people getting infected, they can live in an era of vaccines and therapies and treatments and testing where many more people will survive and stay out of hospital.
Professor Dalgleish, you're the Ebenezer Scrooge of our panel today to a certain degree. You're less euphoric because, you're a world-renowned oncologist and you just think we've got to be cautious.
Yes, I mean, I just put across the point that these results look very, very exciting. They're very good, and you cannot detract from that. It certainly gives a lot of hope, and the efficacy certainly higher than many of the experts predicted. The only thing is that safety issues are the main issue with vaccines, and they may occur in different subsets of people. We just have to be cautious. But I agree, this is very, very good news to progress with.
Okay.
One of the points I would make, however, here is that I do think that as Piers raised earlier on, that the Pfizer one requires a very strong cold chain. And I've worked with cancer vaccines for 2.5 decades now, and the ones that require this very, very cold storage are really problematical. They're bad enough for individual cancer patients, let alone putting it out to the population. So it is good now that we're getting vaccines with efficacy, which looks good. And that means that the ones you're going to choose are the ones with the easiest storage and distribution. So you get one you can put in a fridge and it's got roughly the same efficacy. That's really going to be the one
and that
to go
seems
for.
to be the Moderna one. And they're also all pursuing, aren't they, Professor Sridhar, this same sort of path involving the protein element of all this. For laymen like us, what is that and why is that so significant?
Yeah, so this hasn't been used before, so it's quite innovative. So basically it's trying to inject kind of not the real virus, and that's what Neil was saying, but a protein on it that can trigger the immune system response to create the antibodies and the T cells. So you have a lasting response. And so when you're presented with the real virus, your body knows how to fight it. So I think it's great that we're seeing the same technology coming out in different vaccines showing it to be effective. We've never had a vaccine against a previous coronavirus, so there were questions, could we even get a vaccine? And now I guess the questions are, yes, we'll have a vaccine. We know the effectiveness. Is it safe? And how long does immunity last? So we are progressing. And I think that's why scientists are quite optimistic compared to 6 or 8 months ago.
One of the husband and wife team in Germany on the Pfizer vaccine who cracked it, who was a fascinating guy interviewed by Andrew Marr on Sunday, but he basically said the difference between this and the flu, for example, is every year we get tossed up a new strain of the flu that requires a different type of vaccine. This one so far seems to be reasonably consistent. So you could have a situation where we get vaccinated and you may not need even a booster for up to 5 years or more afterwards.
Yeah, that would be a best case scenario. I think what we have seen with coronaviruses is they are remarkably stable. And, we have seen different strains of this, but the antibody response lasts to these. The one caution is, you might have heard about the minks in Denmark, and there is this worry that if the virus jumps into animals, mutates and jumps back, then perhaps the vaccine might be less effective, which is why we saw the culling of, 17, 18 million mink in Denmark. It just points back to why we need to also be looking at the animals surrounding us to make sure we're not having any more of these spillover events from animals.
Professor Dalgleish, just that triggered something for me because it was Scandinavia. You've been quite vocal against lockdowns as a way of handling this. Sweden has been heralded as the great saviour, the one that didn't lock down. But Sweden is now pretty much locking down. And the Prime Minister gave a very serious speech yesterday, which seems to suggest that their more kind of herd immunity strategy just hasn't worked.
It certainly would appear to be the case with this second or third wave, which seems to be coming through everywhere. We don't really know, though, whether we're dealing with exactly the same virus. There are reports of it mutating, and this may well be something to to take issue with. However, talking about the vaccines and how they would protect, and whether one shot will do all vaccines for the next 2 or 3 versions that come out, or every year, like the flu, I think it's most important to understand that one of the ways to really boost a variant of viruses is to really boost the T-cell response. So as we go through looking at these vaccines very carefully, I think it is going to be the ones that give the broadest T-cell response that's going to protect from these extra waves coming through, because T-cells come in 2 forms, of non-specific, what we call the innate T-cell response, and then the memory one. And I think in those communities where there's a strong innate immunity, the virus does not seem to be nearly as lethal as those that have a poor innate immunity. And I think this is something we're going to have to look very, very carefully at. And I agree that the thing that's happening in Sweden is of great concern. But I think when we stand back a whole year after we first came across working on this in March, and then look back at the UK, Sweden, France, Spain, America, etc., then we'll be able to see exactly what we mean by so-called herd immunity, which is more, I would say, is more of an innate immunity in the population as opposed to a herd